Recently, I sat down with Malcolm Collins from Based Camp. You may remember Malcolm and his wife Simone. They were on this show, oh gosh, a while back, and we did a program about the anthropology of the trans movement to discuss whether it's a cult. It was a fascinating show, and I hope you do check it out. But at that time, when we met, Malcolm told me that he and Simone were working on a new school. They were working on developing an alternative school using AI, actually. And when they finished it, or at least the alpha version of it, he got in touch with me and said, hey, we finished it. And I took a look and I was super excited to share it with you and have a conversation with him about it, because I didn't want to just throw a link up and say, hey guys, go check out Malcolm and Simone's new school. The reason I was hesitant is that it is driven largely by AI, and I was concerned that a lot of you would see that and see my endorsement of the project as an endorsement overall of using AI to educate your kids, no matter who's doing it, even if it's the public school doing it or your private school doing it or, whomever. And that is not the case. So at the same time, I want to make something very clear about my position on AI. And that is that, like any other technology, it is how you use it. It exists. It's not going anywhere. Unless you're planning to move to a cabin in the woods and go all Ted Kaczynski, you and your children have to function in a world in which AI is used by, pretty much everybody. We've been using it. What you call AI today has been around since Alan Turing. I mean, a computer itself, to a certain degree, is an artificial version of our brain, and it's helped augment what we're able to do. We've put people on the moon using computers. So while this is bigger and seems a little sci-fi and scary, and certainly without ethical people using it could turn truly scary, you still have to figure out how to make it your bitch and not the other way around. And the only way you can do that, the only way your children are going to be able to do that, is to interact with it to see its potential. And if you can use it to educate your children in a sort of traditional way, just using it as the media, the medium or the delivery system or the aggregator of content, that actually could be pretty awesome, and a pretty awesome way to do it, because you would be hard pressed independently to do what their new school is going to allow you to do. And I don't want to talk any further. I want you to just listen to the interview, but I hope I've piqued your interest as to why Deb is recommending an AI-driven school as a possible solution for you. And, I could go farther into Malcolm's background here in this little intro, but again, I want to get straight to the interview. I've written everything below. There's so much to be learned from Malcolm and Simone. I do hope you check out their podcast, Base Camp, and their books, which are on sale, by the way, on Amazon for about $1 a piece, and the money goes to charity. So these are some fascinating, super smart people, and I'm excited for you to learn more about their school. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Fillman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hi, Malcolm. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. I am so glad you're here today. How are you?
Hello, I am so excited to be here with you today. I'm Malcolm Collins.
For those of you who are not familiar with Malcolm Collins, you should definitely check out, as I said in the intro, you should check out the YouTube channel, which is Based Camp, and you're gonna love the content there. I promise you, you're gonna love the content. But I've asked Malcolm here today to talk about a very exciting project that you and your lovely wife Simone have just finished doing. It's a new school.
Yeah, a new school, an alternative to the existing educational system. This is something that what we're most publicly known for is running the Pronatalist Movement. So trying to resolve falling fertility rates. And we've gotten some donations to that movement. And every, penny that we've gotten for the Pronatalist Movement, we've been putting into developing this school that's called the Institute, the Collins Institute. So you can find it at collinsinstitute.org
Right.
or parasia.io, where parasia means sort of like an obligation to tell the truth or the type of truth that's dangerous to tell. And that's like our YouTube launch video there. But yeah, so
I want to watch it. So let me get it. Let me get it to where we can watch it.
My video was me here.
Yeah, is that okay?
Sure. Frankly, we're terrified to send our kids into the legacy school system. To that end, my wife and I built the Collins Institute, a comprehensive interactive map or skill tree comprising all of human knowledge. The platform is designed to be usable as soon as a student gets comfortable with reading and goes about midway through a PhD in most subjects. However, we built it to cover all human knowledge, meaning it covers a much larger domain than is taught in the traditional school system, ranging from tort law to hanging drywall to the industrial transportation of grain or aquaculture pharmacology. Of course, we included a mechanism that allows parents to censor skill nodes they don't believe their children are mature enough to interact with healthily. So how does it work? First, choose how you want to see the tree. We have a list view, a radial view, and a lateral view. Skills within the tree are color-coded based on their difficulty, while the legend to the coding is here. Click on a node to open it. The node will include a description of what knowledge is needed to pass its test, as well as a list of the best places to learn that information. Vote on the sources that were most useful to you by clicking this button. To add an additional source, click this button, write something here, then click Submit. In order to take the test to pass the node, click here. These tests are short and meant to keep our students honest with themselves about their level of knowledge, not as an absolute test of skill. Our goal was to make learning as fun as possible and to take out all of the arbitrary busy work associated with quote-unquote education. And my goodness, did we succeed. We have both played around with the platform, and if only I could go back to my childhood and spend days immersed in learning for its own sake without rails. Despite us having graduate degrees from Stanford and Cambridge, had we gotten our education from this platform, we would be astoundingly better informed about the world than we are. This is the alpha version of our product, meaning we've had to lean pretty heavily on AI. We can only improve it through you, the users, flagging content that could be improved by hitting this button. Oh, and it's free. And I think a lot of people, they hear what we're doing and they're like, why is the pronatalist movement so focused on fixing education? And it's like, for literally every reason. I mean, first of all, if you want to have a large family and you're middle class, your kids won't get to be within the same class demographic as you if college is a class gator. But fortunately, the existing educational system is sort of self-destructing at the moment, which makes it pretty easy to compete with an alternative. But in addition to that, you have the problem of this, we call it a lot in our videos, the urban monoculture, which is essentially this cult that we'll probably go into later in the video, that has taken over a lot of the educational system, and it attempts to build an ideological system in kids that is hostile to a lot of traditional families and that functions in part by creating animosity between children and parents, because that's the way cults usually function. The first thing you need to do is to separate somebody from their support network, which is generally their birth culture and their parents. And so you can build systems there. But as you can see, like, we're here calling this thing a school, and it's so different from any educational pedagogy that like anyone has seen. I think I almost feel like maybe a better way to drop people into it is to be like, it's kind of like a Wikipedia that could replace a school, but it's not close to any sort of school or educational platform that anyone has ever seen before.
Right.
It's like a way of sorting the existing platform. So if you think about something like, somebody's like, well, why would you have this when you have something like Khan Academy, right? It's like, well, there's two big reasons, right? So Khan Academy isn't going to be the best educational source for every single skill you might learn. Like, for example, Khan Academy might have a really good, like general history and in a few areas of math, but in some areas of advanced math, you're actually going to be better off going to what's that great math course online? I want to call it like that. Whatever. There's a few like really good
There are,
math
yeah.
courses. Or like Khan Academy is definitely not going to have the best lecture on how to do drywall or how to, cook some types of meals or how to make friends.
Right.
So
Well,
what
it
this,
also has a point of view. And
yeah, it
what
also
the
has a
first
point of
thing
view.
that jumps out at me about yours is that, as you point out, it allows the parents to sort of decide at what level the student, is ready for certain kinds of content, so they can act as age appropriate sort of gatekeepers. The other thing is that Khan Academy, in order to fund itself and remain free, it has partnered with the College Board and a few other organizations that then tell them what is true and what is
Yes.
information. So its epistemology is already geared and oriented towards the existing system of college, the urban monoculture, all of that. And what you're doing instead is saying it's the world is your oyster. Like it's
Yeah. So
much broader.
we've got to talk about how we prevent bias in our system, because we had an earlier system for preventing bias that was based off of prediction marketplaces and stuff like that we ended up dropping just because it added unnecessary additional complication. And I'll add a bit more color to the censoring of nodes. So we give the parents the ability to basically turn off a student's access to specific nodes, so they won't see them, they won't be on the tree. This is not something we expect the average user of the platform to be using, unless the average user of the platform turns out to be very religious. It's mostly for very religious people to turn off like the part of the tree on human sexuality. Or like we had a philosophy when we were building this that we would put literally every domain of knowledge that we could think about in this tree without any filters for, oh, this is off topic, oh, this isn't really part of a normal education. So an example would be you'll have something like there's a node on Nazi occultism. And a person might be like, oh, Nazi occultism, that is not something I want my kid learning about. Like, even though it's like a part of history and a part of the way the Nazi party worked, like, or like actual pagan belief systems, like I want to block those off the tree, right? Or research into the historical Jesus, the way that academia studies Jesus. Will have one note on that, and then we'll have like the way like the church would study Jesus. And some individuals might say, I want to block one of those two nodes out because of their existing. And I absolutely want parents to have that capacity. In terms of like bias, so we have a system where anyone can suggest edits. So any user can suggest, I want to edit this, I want this to be different here, I want, or flag like this needs to be rewritten here. And then that edit gets sort of stored, but is not auto put in. And then we have a team of editors. And the team of editors approves edits and can suggest other edits. However, all the actions taken by the team of editors is visible to everyone else on the team of editors at all times, both what they're approving and what they themselves have done. So if anyone is acting outside of sort of the norms of the community, that then gets brought to me and I can just take them out. And so the core risk here is twofold then. It is one, that I guess I, like the person at the top, has some sort of ideological bias, which, like, I mean, I do, but I think it's the bias that aligns with most of the parents who would be using it,
Right.
which is to say it's probably a center right ideological bias. So by that, what I mean is like, where would that show up in the tree? So like, you're going to go through, if you're doing like American civil rights, you're going to go through a lot of the classic American civil rights battle. But at the end of that tree, there's a node on the scams that were run using the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, a left-leaning person would say that has no business being in education. And I'd say it absolutely does. It's important to
Yeah.
understand how these movements that are supposed to be doing good can cheat people out of money that can then be spent on mansions and stuff. Like
Right.
that's important for me, for my kid to learn about. And I think most like center right-leaning parents would be like, yeah, that's probably an important thing to have in there. And then I think, okay, well, where else might they have a problem? I think a lot of people who might use this tree, the biggest problem they're going to have with it is the breadth of it. Just like, my kid really doesn't need an entire section on like conspiracy theories, or like we have every conspiracy theory listed
They
here.
go down the rabbit hole, right?
Yeah. We have nothing is like out of bounds for the tree. And so they might just be like, I want to take that out or something. And they can. So I don't need to worry about that bias. The biggest part where people come to the tree and our bias is negatively affecting the tree, and this is going to be washed out over time as we get suggestions, is the sections where I have a great deal of expertise are just much better organized and fleshed out than the sections where I have very little expertise. So psychology is very well fleshed out. Biology is very well fleshed out. Physics is very well fleshed out. Biology is very well fleshed out. But like the coding section, coders have said it needs a lot of work. The advanced math section apparently needs a lot of work, but that's just going to happen as people are using the tree.
Sure.
And we already have people like coming in and making edits, and we also have a team right now. So people should know like why we're not doing lots of ads for it right now. Right now, we actually have a team that we're trying to get like 20 or 30 just full-time all-day editors going through and editing it. And once they've been working on it for about 6 months, I think we'll get most of the obvious low-hanging fruit cleared out, and it should basically function. But right now, there are a lot of mistakes because most of the content was generated with AI.
It reminds me, the way you describe it, it reminds me of the Library of Alexandria. No, I mean, if
that, that's good. That's what I wanted to do. Yeah.
No, if we think about what maybe a lot of people don't know this, but what the Library of Alexandria was, people came from all over the known world with the things they were studying and or had contributed to knowledge, right? Their papers, their research, their designs, and they would come there not only to look at what other people had produced in all these various fields that you just described as were at the time, but to add their own. They'd bring copies of their scrolls and various things. And so tragically, when that burned, we lost so much human knowledge that was, somebody might have gone to the Library of Alexandria and said, this is way more than I ever wanted to know about whatever, some niche thing about astronomy, let's say. But it was everything that was known somebody could physically bring to that library. And then it was sort of up to the visitor, up to the student, up to the scholar to decide, and people became known. You'd start to know this thinker, this writer, that writer, but it was pretty much a repository for all of it. It was not super duper selective. If you could write it down and, demonstrate that this was knowledge, it went there. And so it reminds me of that in that sense that you, the student or the parent of the student, are going to need to, encourage your student to use their mind, right? And make selections. And really that's what it comes right down to it. That's what we all end up doing after we leave school anyway. And it's the one thing that school actually doesn't do, because you have no agency in the legacy school system. The entire, from the pedagogy all the way to the epistemology, it's defined for you. Here it is. Boom. This is the knowledge worth knowing. That's the message. And so by the end of 13 years, the message you get is there other knowledge either doesn't exist or isn't worth knowing.
Yeah,
because
and it was
the
wild.
experts chose it.
Building this out, one of the things I had a lot of fun with was all the parts of the tree that go outside the traditional education system. And it's remarkable, like the parts of the tree that go outside the traditional education system. And I'm like, yeah, but like this really should probably be in the traditional education system. Like there's big parts on the tree on like law, like tort law, stuff like that. It's like, why wasn't I taught any law in the American public school system? Like that seems like an important thing to know. And
well, when freedom is based on law, people think very often it's based on, morality or values or something like that. And no, in fact, the American system, which derives from the British common law system, is really derived from the concept of law, that there are certain fundamental truths and fundamental rules that we as a society are going to agree to live by, because you can talk about my freedom of speech, my freedom of this all day long. Yeah. But if there's nothing there to hold people accountable to protect those rights, you don't have them.
And then the other sections where I was like, why isn't this in the school system? We tried to think about like everything about how our economy and society work today.
Yes.
So we'll have things on like grain distribution, as we talked about, like how does grain get transported? How is it stored? How does mass agriculture work? How does industrial meat production work? How does fish pharmacology, this used on like fish farms work. So we try to go really deep into all of the major industries that drive our society. How does the lumber industry work? And this is another area where when I was building out this section, I was like, this should really be in the traditional education system. And then
you think so? You think maybe that would be harder for people to say, well, just shut the economy down for a couple of years and everything will be fine. Just DoorDash it.
Just DoorDash it. Yeah. Or another thing that we took a lot of inspiration from was this book that I really liked when I was a kid. That had mammoths and they were like discussing how technology worked. I don't know if you ever saw this book. It's like one of my favorite books ever. But it was cartoons of like how different things work. Like how does like a fax machine work functionally?
Yeah.
And so like we went into this was like, how do phones work? How do like technology that a person is using on a day-to-day basis? How does a car engine work? How does all of the things that like a general person should know? So like that's the way that we approached all of that. I will say that one thing that was, and you were talking about this before the show, there was a huge design change in our philosophy. Is you were talking about how so many of the existing educational systems are like trying to get people to rote memorize stuff. And when I first used this, we wanted this to be like a direct alternative to the public education system in the minds of people who are in the public education system. And that meant that every node had to be a true test of a person's ability. So that meant that, we had to have somebody monitoring somebody on a camera. We had to have like 100 questions. It was a giant question bank. We had to have all of this stuff, right? Well, I sat down and I tried to play with the tree. And I was just like, this isn't fun. Like taking at the time we were working on like 25 question, 30 question tests. I was like taking a 30 question test on something that I know is not fun. And I don't want to do it anymore, right? Like after a little bit of playing around with it. And then I realized, we didn't want to build this around, like a lot of people, when they say that they're building educational systems, they're like, we're going to gamify it, right? And in a way we have, and that we've used some game systems, like the idea of a skill tree or a tech tree, but we didn't base it around dopamine loops, right? But I will say that we did want to take from game design this idea of an engaging game loop. And so there's different stages of a game. And in this, if you were going to break it into stages, it is the test stage, then the going to a new node and learning a new thing, and then getting access to new knowledge, and then going and studying that, right? Like, and I was like, let's pare down the test to very little. So the tests on the tree now, when a student takes them, are only 8 questions long. And a lot of people are very surprised. They're like, that's not really a true, like, definitive test of a person's ability at something. I'm like, no, it's not. But it is a test that is enough to demonstrate to an individual, to the student, whether they actually know that thing. And so what we wanted to transform the test into was to an external person saying, I'm going to judge whether or not you know this, to a tool that helps the student judge for themselves whether or not they actually know a subject. And that was, to me, really transformative and sort of how we designed everything else, because that's what we wanted. Like, I want a tree, and I wanted an educational system that encouraged students to learn, but ultimately left the responsibility of judging whether or not they know something up to them. And if they start advancing way far up in a part of the tree and they don't actually know the bottom stuff, they're going to quickly realize that this is causing them problems in learning the more advanced skills. And that was... Yeah, I really liked that, because it's how a student relates to knowledge, which is important, because the educational system, I mean, I can talk about all the crazy stuff that's going on in it. I think the brainwashing and everything like that is just insane, but also just the way it relates to knowledge. Like, sit down, children, and I will tell you what is true, instead of, okay, here's like things you could learn, have fun.
Even with some of the things, you mentioned, they'll take it, they'll gamify it. So we were talking before the show, and one thing that came to mind was something called IXL. Now, IXL is a very popular ed tech. They use it in schools, usually for math and for grammar type subjects, because it has a multiple choice type of system for checking, and then it gives you little badges and all that kind of moves you to the next thing. And I tutor, as you may know, and as my sort of job or whatever. And parents will come to me and say, I want you to fill in the gaps or teach my child grammar. And then I'll say something like, well, what do they know so far? This is a sixth grader. Have they learned the parts of speech? Oh,
Yeah.
yes, they were taught the parts of speech using iExcel. And so right away I have a red flag, that goes up, because I know that when you're presented always with the right answer is in front of you. And so all you have to do is sort of figure out like the pattern to get the right answer and then move on to the next thing. And you learn how to take the test. You don't necessarily learn how to use the information it's testing for. So I administered my own diagnostic, one sentence. Really, the student who'd learned the parts of speech should have been able to take it apart. It was very simple. Absolutely categorically failed. And so I had to find a way to tell the mom that she may have been taught, in quotes, the parts of speech by iExcel, but she hadn't learned the parts of speech with iExcel. So people are using a lot of these cool, fun games, and then there's Khan Academy and so on, and saying, oh, they got 100 and they've advanced, they've mastered the material, but then they can't apply it. They can't use it. And they are very frustrated when they have to apply it, or they get marked wrong on an essay or something. But I learned this, but you didn't.
Yeah, well, and this is really important. It's how a school is relating to the concept of knowledge and learning itself.
Yeah.
Is learning something they do because they want to improve themselves and because they enjoy it, or is it something they do because they're being graded and told by an authority what's true and what's not true? And I should note that not all of our, a lot of our questions are multiple choice. We actually have essay questions and picture-based questions. So people are learning, wait, where are the picture-based questions? We have a food tree, like learn to cook eggs like 4 ways, learn to, and more advanced stuff. It's like sushi preparation.
Cool.
And that one is graded by pictures and an AI acts as the grader. So we have an AI look at the pictures and decide if something was done correctly and pass the student or not pass the student. And it's same with the essay questions. And a lot of people can be like, well, I think that people who like poo-poo AI these days are just people who haven't used the advanced AIs these days, because they're really good at this stuff, especially at judging like an individual's knowledge of a skill or something like that. But yeah, and it's shocking to me the types of questions I get, or the types of guffaws I get with the system, as they, to me, show like the failures of the existing system. So I'll have people come up to me and they'll say things like, well, but who's the teacher? Who does the student go to if they don't know something? And I'm like, well, I mean, who do you go to once you're out of school if you don't know something? Like, I want them to have access to the same teachers they're going to have access to when they're no longer in school. When there's gaps in an individual's knowledge that some individuals have been trained, seek the authority. They will tell me truth from untruth. It's very, very bad. I think that's downstream of a lot of the problems we have in our society today. Yep. Whereas kids who are going through this system, if they are confused about something, they can, we'll have like a list of tutors of people who like a skill and they're like open to talking with other people. But they can also go to AIs. They can also go to Google. They can also go to all of the various places. They can also ask their parents, and to me, that's such a stronger answer than the authority. Or they'll say something like, well, how is a student going to be socialized? And anyone who's actually looked at the studies on this knows that the reality is that kids who are homeschooled, if you look at the meta studies, are slightly better socialized than kids who are not homeschooled. As to why this is the case, it is because they're basically not in this weird Lord of the Flies social experiment that public school has turned into. And people are like, no, I remember homeschool kids being weird when I was growing up. And I'm like, if you went to public school, think back. Why did you think the homeschool kids were weird? Because I remembered this too. And I went back and I thought about this and I was like, well, because they didn't engage in like pointless social displays, because they were way more polite than the other kids, because they were like not as aggressive as the other kids. And I was like, oh, they were just like more mature than the other kids. And my child brain categorized that as having bad social skills, when it really was that they had learned their social skills from an adult social ecosystem and not a child Lord of the Flies social ecosystem. And
they also tended to have niche interests. So, what we lost going to school, and I went to schools, was opportunity to be bored, opportunity to, of our own, like creatively bored, opportunity to spend time just going down that rabbit hole of reading the novels I want to read or studying what I want to study or whatever. And the homeschool kids get to do that. And so what they're engaged in oftentimes is pursuing those interests. And to your point, they look upon the sort of wasting time, small talk, social gossipy stuff as like, why would I do that when I can do this other much cooler, more interesting thing?
Yeah, yeah. And then people will be like, "Oh, and homeschoolers, they have all their friends online," and it's like, yeah, but like, shouldn't they? Like, if you look at the world today, right? Um, are the people who happen to be in my geographic region likely to be the people who are like best matched to me as like interesting conversational partners, or
Yes.
am I going to find those people in a distributed ecosystem? This actually comes to our next project that we're working on. That is sort of a partner system to our schools. So one of the big problems you have is even if you get your kids out of school, right? A lot of, well, the cult, I'll call it basically, has infiltrated a lot of child focused social domains. So that might be like a group of Fortnite players, that might be like a group of online fan fiction writers, that might be like a group of whatever, right? Like this is a dangerous place for kids. But even if you try to locally curate who your children's friends are, like, okay, my children's friends are their church group. The problem is those kids just aren't going to be as cool, where cool is defined by like perfectly aligned with your child's interests, as the distributed online environment of potential friends is. And so the kids get peeled off. And so I've been thinking, how do I fix this? And the way that we've come to fix this is we're building out a network of aligned parents. And the kids of these parents will have like Discord servers for them. And once a year, we'll have the option for anyone in these groups to go do a trip to stay at like a summer camp we're going to rent out. And this will create an environment that is much larger and much, better educated and more, high impact than the random socially aligned groups in our geographic area.
Mhm.
So it's got a wider range of potential kids that our kids can interact with, and kids with parents who are often like movers and shakers of various types. But they can actually meet with these people, which allows this group to be in a way strictly better than just the people they can meet with in other environments. And even better than that, because I know what young teens are interested in, they are allowed to date people in this group. So one of the things that we would have as a system is that if they wanted to date someone in the group, they could go and live for a month with that person's family, or that person could go live with our family, or like a week or whatever,
Right, right.
which would do a few really important things. It would, one, put them in a social environment where that's different from like my family's culture, where they'll learn different value systems. The Puritans in early America used to do this. It was called
Yeah.
sending out. They didn't do this for dating. They did this just for like training skills and stuff like that. But then in addition to that, the kids would be doing their early dates in an environment where they're supervised by one of the parents, right? And they understand, like, if they push too hard or something like that and they make the other person uncomfortable, they're now in a very uncomfortable environment, right? But in addition to that, they are thinking about impressing both the parents, like the family, and the potential date at the same time, which I think brings dating back to its original context. Where,
Courtship. Remember
yeah,
courtship?
courtship. Yeah, it's about finding someone to marry, not about getting laid.
Yeah.
And so, you're getting these additional things that you can't get with these random online friend groups, which means they're less likely to be infiltrated by these like
Right.
self-replicating mimetic packets.
Well, and you get rid of really annoying things like ghosting and other stupid the way it's done now with the online and like swipe right, whatever it is that people do. um there's so many unhealthy habits. And I want to get back to what you mentioned where you said that dopamine loop. Could you explain to people watching what you mean by that? Because I think it's really important for people to understand when we get to my next question, which is about doing school
Yeah,
online. So go
so
ahead.
online stuff. So a lot of people are like, screen time is bad for kids. And I'm like, Kind of. My background is in neuroscience. Like I have a degree in neuroscience from St. Andrews, currently the top ranked university in the UK, above Oxford and Cambridge. So I gotta brag about that. But no, so I used to work in neuroscience. I haven't published in neuroscience. And when people say, screen time is bad for kids, that's a bit like saying, well, living in the Tenderloin in San Francisco is bad for people. And I'm like, well, what do you mean living in the Tenderloin is bad for people? And they're like, well, whenever I go to the Tenderloin, I see all these sick looking people who are like yelling at people on the streets and throwing up. And I'm like, that's the meth that they're taking. It's not the Tenderloin, the geographic region that's bad for people. It's all the meth that's in the Tenderloin. The thing that's mentally toxic in online environments is dopamine loops. But not everything in an online environment is a dopamine loop. Like, for example, even with as bad as like Wikipedia has gotten these days, if I was to leave my kids, like if the Collins Institute didn't exist, if I was to leave my kids with an online like thing that like only could access Wikipedia, do I think that this has any chance of causing any sort of negative effects in them? No. Like they would categorically be better off for having access to that tablet with only access to Wikipedia. The challenge is that tablets don't just have access to Wikipedia. They can, okay, so I should note what a dopamine loop is. There are ways that you can create addiction within a person using only their pre-existing neurochemical pathways. And some people are more susceptible to certain types of these addictions than others. Basically, the way it's created is through intermittent rewards. If you do something like you put a mouse or a rat in a cage and you create a system where it hits a little lever and it gets a treat, it won't become addicted to pushing that lever. But if it hits the lever and it occasionally gets a treat, it'll like get really addicted to
That's why slot machines work.
Yeah, so slot machines work. But it's also how Facebook works. It's how TikTok works. It's how YouTube works. It's how Twitter works. Well, but they're doing it with social responses. So when I post something to Twitter, I am not sure how my fans are going to respond to that, or not my fans. If I'm a kid, my friend group is going to respond to that. And then sometimes they respond to it well, sometimes they don't respond to it well. So what these platforms have allowed us to do is take these social systems that we have and translate them into intermittent rewards. And typically the more you can shorten these rewards, the better the dopamine loops work. So when I'm on TikTok, like I'm not sure if the next video is going to be good, but if it can deliver me a good video with enough frequency, I will become more addicted because of the occasional good video I get within that environment.
It makes perfect sense to me. And I'm not a neuroscientist. I mean, just even observing how, adults function. And then you have a young brain that is developing. And we know just even from intermittently rewarding a child with anything that they're trying to get or trying to do, they are going to, it works well in the positive, where, if you praise them every single solitary time they do something, they kind of whatever.
Well, continue.
I was just going to say, if you praise them when they really have an accomplishment, but not every single time they do something, then they tend to pursue that a little harder and they work a little harder. And I'm not saying go do that and manipulate people. I'm just saying that watching how people behave, they respond better when they don't always get what they're looking for.
Yeah, and children's brains are, specifically teenagers' brains, are hypersensitized to social rewards and social approval, and they will react much more strongly to it than an adult brain will, and will cue to it much more strongly. So they're more affected by these systems than adults are. And this is why you get things like, by the CDC's own statistics, they released something a couple of years back that showed that 1 in 4 young girls in our school system is creating a plan to off themselves every year, not throughout the course of their childhood, every year. It was a 1 in 10 kids acted out one of these plans every year. And I was like, that is if there was like a toy or something that was having this effect, it would be so hard recalled. It would be the scandal of the century. And yet it's our society and our school system that's creating this. And so the question is And then a person can be like, well, then why would you create a school system that's just like intrinsically online? Like, why don't you ban kids from online environments? Oh, and I should note here that there's a separate type of danger for young kids from screens. Anyone who has ever given their kids YouTube just to play with the regular YouTube app,
Yeah.
if you let them do that unsupervised and you come back in 30 minutes, you will find them watching something that, I call CP, right? Because it acts like corn does in adults, which is to say it's like a super normal stimuli, where it's content that is just, it will seem bizarre to you as an adult. It'll be like cars being dipped in different colors of paint, or like balls rolling, like simple physics simulators, or very simple repetitive things. And it is very clear that like they are engaging with it because some part of their brain is coded to do something that our adult brains are not coded to do, to like seek specific types of information in their understanding of reality. And these have created a super simplified version of that stimuli. And I believe it's likely causing pretty big negative effects in children's brains if they're left with this content. Now, if a kid is just watching like The Magic School Bus, which is what we lock our kids into a lot. It's actually a really good show for kids. Like when I watch it now, I'm like, why is there no content like this anymore?
I know.
So we have them watch The Magic School Bus. I don't think that there is like really a high probability that that's going to cause any sort of long-term negative effects. And if anything, I think probably pretty positive effects. And if people are like, why would I assume that would cause positive effects? Because the reality is the type of words and social stimuli that kids are going to get, especially when they're in a big family, is just going to be intrinsically limited. Like, even if I'm talking to my kid all day in the way that they can engage back with me, I'm not going to be talking about like the water cycle or something like that.
That's right.
And so it is useful from a vocabulary perspective, from a knowledge about the world perspective, that they have access to that. But then it all comes to this broader question, which is like, well, why risk it? Why not just ban them from touching any of this stuff, right? And now this becomes a very interesting question where I'm like, you can try, but there's a lot of dangers in doing that. If you remove a temptation from somebody,
Yeah.
and then you put them in an environment where they never learn to deal with that temptation and now they have access to it, are they going to fall off a cliff? I remember this in college, the kids who, had been banned from playing video games at home, and then they
Yeah.
failed out because they found WoW and became like basement dwellers who never left their room anymore. Like, if you do not build systems, because this stuff is in our environment anymore. One of the
Right.
things we talk about on our channel is I likened it sin in the world today, and the temptations that we face today as it used to be that you could tell people, well, like, avoid rivers, right? Like, if you want to drown, avoid rivers, avoid streams, avoid the ocean. And some cultures would just say, okay, we're going to avoid all of that, right? Like, we're going to avoid these categories of sin. And I'm like, that's the problem is now we're all underwater. Okay.
Right.
And if that was how you got around, the fact that you couldn't breathe underwater, your kids are pretty effed when they enter the mainstream economy. And I likened it to the movie The Abyss, where they had the fluid that like the mouse was put in, and it was forced to drink to learn to breathe the water. I'm like, our kids have to learn to breathe the online environment,
That's
or
right.
they are not going to be competitive. And outside of just not being competitive, they either have to live like Amish people their whole lives, which severely limits
Right.
their ability to engage with the world, or we need to teach them how to engage with this stuff responsibly.
Right.
And that's something that like we try to focus on a lot of the family. And our kids even know this. They know certain shows. They're like, oh, that show's a bad show. That's like a bad for you show. And they can distinguish now between the types of shows that are good for them, that have like sophisticated plots with real characters and things happening, and the shows that are simple loop cycles.
Well, it's the same as with us adults. And I'm Gen X, so I grew up without any of this stuff, without personal computers, without any of it. And yet now I consider myself fairly tech savvy for someone pushing 60. And, yet I think about it a lot. How is it that I am able to use the internet as much as I do? And I use it like all day, every day. And I do use social media, and I do consume a lot of streaming entertainment and all kinds of things. And yet I still read books. I still am very choosy about the entertainment I watch and even how much time I spend on social media and where I go on social media. And I start thinking about, well, what enables me to do that, and what is going on in my brain that I'm not getting sucked into this dopamine loop, or I'm not getting sucked into very self-destructive kind of stuff, content, and so on. And what I think is that because there's a balance, and so that's why I tell parents, and it's like, if your children learn to read well and they become avid readers and they build the vocabulary and background knowledge about the world in which they live, it does act no matter how they get that information. Okay. So even if they got the information from like your school, for example, it's the quality of that information and the interaction of I read, I engage, and so on. And I think that acts as that inoculation. I even watch my own daughter do it because she does use social media, but she will say to me, it's like, that's dumb. So in other words, something that come up that I know affects other kids negatively, she can literally see it, but because she's been kind of taught to think, she sees it kind of the way I see it, like, that's stupid. Like, why would anyone get sucked into that? Why would someone think that way? You have to build your you probably know how to describe it better. I would call it like neural pathways. I don't know what it is, to be able to filter what is knowledge, what is not knowledge, what is good for me, what is bad for me, like your kids are doing already.
Well, you have to learn to resist temptation, right?
That too.
The way that we used to talk about it, right?
Yeah, that too.
And this is, just one of the things. Like, I think one of the key things that we as parents are responsible for in how we engage with our kids is help them develop a framework for why they would do one thing instead of another thing. Like
Yeah, that's a good point.
how they contextualize purpose within their lives. And, this used to be easy. Like, as society, everyone was religious, everyone was the same religion. And so it was like that's what you exist for, right? But as that has declined in society, it's made it harder to transmit values, to just say, well, this is what your life is for because this is what our ancestors' lives were for. You need better scaffolding for kids in terms of like what they exist for. When my kid goes on the computer and is interacting with stuff, for him or her to be able to resist the social feedback loops, for example, they have to have a purpose that is higher order than what feels good in the moment.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just haven't thought about how they're going to build that for their kids, or are under the mistaken assumption that their kids are under their framework, i.e., I took my kid to church every week, therefore he believes it because he knows he'd be punished if he didn't. And I'm like, no, what you just told me is if he didn't believe it, he wouldn't tell you. And so
that's right.
now he's has to build some alternate framework all by himself. And the alternate framework of the urban monoculture is that the urban monoculture is like the dominant cultural force in our society, is
Right.
do whatever makes you feel good. Like, those are the good things to do. And affirm yourself for whatever you want to believe about yourself. And this model for engaging with the world, not just with screens, but more broadly, is psychologically damaging in the extreme because
Right.
it causes people to become hypersensitized to negative stimuli. So, there's this big parenting movement today that's like, we don't discipline our kids. We just give them whatever they want,
Gentle parenting.
whenever they want. Yeah. There's like the anti-timeout movement, the anti-allowance movement, like all kids mandatory allowance. You can't take that away from a kid, and no timeouts and no bedtime and no. There's like movements for this online now, right? And I'm like, and this is where like trigger warnings come from, right? Like, I should never have to experience any negative emotional stimuli, because if you've never experienced any growing up and you experience one by accident, you become hypersensitized to it and you'll enter a spiral really quickly because your brain won't be able to handle it. And so this is again why you should not have your kids grow up in a bubble, or they grow up without like immunities to the way that life will challenge them.
That's right.
But also the way that temptations will challenge them online.
Well, that gets back to your point about, the Nazi occultism. And you're right that there are people today who sort of overgeneralized the warnings that we've given them about the indoctrination going on in the legacy system, where they don't want their kids taught things at an age inappropriate time,
Yeah.
right? To being sexualized early or being exposed to an idea that is quite damaging to the psyche and their ability to think, like critical theory. But to say, don't ever expose your child to it is like putting them in a bubble. They will not, they'll come across it at some point. They're going to come across this mind virus. And then are they going to have the antibodies, and to your point, to understand why the Nazis did what they did and really deeply understand it? Why wouldn't you want to know it? People have a tendency these days to think if you're exposed to it and you learn about it, you will agree with it. And
Yeah.
that's not
Well,
true.
and this is actually the urban monoculture. When it takes kids, the core way it does it is it looks for parts of a person's framework of the world that the parents didn't fill in.
That's
And one of the
correct.
most common for religious parents or just parents who are afraid of having uncomfortable conversations with their kids is sexuality and gender.
That's right.
And if you leave that hole open, like if you're one of those parents who goes to our tree and you just censor the entire section that explains how human sexuality works, if kids don't have a better framework than the one being presented to them, because no framework was ever presented for them, then these self-replicating sort of mimetic structures can be put in the back door of their brain and eventually eat sort of their entire mental space for how the world works. One of the things when I was talking about like give your kid purpose, I love it how the urban monoculture sees this as so sinful. It's like you have expectations of your kids. I'm like, yeah, I have expectations of my kids. Like, one of the things that I work with my kid on all the time, like it's like a mantra we have, like, what do you exist for? Like, why are you here on Earth? And he says it's to fix the world. Like I'm here to make the world a better place. And when he is educating himself, like when he sits down at the computer, his framework is, why am I doing this rather than video games? Or why am I doing this rather than Twitter? It's, does this help achieve my end state better to fix the world? And somebody's like, oh my God, how could you give a kid such a big responsibility? And it's like, I wish more parents today were giving their kids big responsibilities.
Well, I think people misunderstand. They take what they're hearing from like the social justice warriors who say things like fix the world, and what they're actually saying is make everyone agree with my version of
Yeah.
what the world's supposed to be. What you, I believe, are saying is that by my existence and focusing on virtuous activities and life affirming and life enhancing activities and pursuits, I will make the world a better place, even in my own sphere. But if we all did that, if we were all engaged in those kind of activities all the time, the world would be a better place. The fact of the matter is, you can't, there's a limited sphere of influence that you have. And the SJW says, I'm going to go get millions of people to try to do what I want them to do, which is absurd and a ridiculous responsibility to put on a kid, versus I'm going to live a virtuous life and I'm going to make my world a better place and thereby make the world a better place. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
No, that really matters is in, once you have built this highest order, like what are they supposed to do? Then you work with them on building, like, what does a better world look like? What does what does a better society look like? And then you can begin to build their moral philosophy, because that's something that a lot of people don't have now. They just default to like general utilitarianism, like pleasure good, pain bad, maximize pleasure, which is a very simplistic moral system. It basically, they're just saying, if you're a religious person, like most religions did not believe this historically, or if you're a secular person, you're just saying, well, the things I define as good are the things that led to some of my ancestors having slightly more surviving offspring than their neighbors, these specific emotional stimuli in response to environmental circumstances. And those environmental circumstances don't even exist anymore. So like, why would they be keyed to good outcomes anymore? I often joke it's like a group of paperclip maximizers. When people are afraid of AI, they're afraid of like an AI that's programmed to make paperclips, like just turning all of the universe into paperclips, right? Humans are sort of programmed by this pleasure and pain response thing. And I often feel like when a group of humans comes together and decides to be general utilitarians, it's like a group of paperclip maximizers coming together and deciding that all that matters in the world is paperclips. And then one of the AIs is like, well, I mean, I understand that we're coded to think paperclips are good, but like maybe there's something of higher value than paperclips, and we're just coded to think this. And one of the other AIs turns to them and they're like, yeah, but you wouldn't like it if I stopped you from making paperclips. Like somebody always is like, well, you wouldn't like it if I hurt you. I'm like, well, yes, because I'm a paperclip maximizer. But I'm saying, can we maybe think above our own programming here? And I think that when you build these better like philosophical systems for kids, they're able to more quickly see the silliness of the urban monoculture as it's coming at them and build more of a robust moral framework. Because I think that moral frameworks are something that people just, well, they haven't really gotten used to building for a long time. Like if you think about the traditions used to be how we conveyed moral frameworks to kids. And so you would have a tradition like Santa Claus, right? But now Santa Claus, every kid is good. Santa Claus teaches a kid that basically no matter what you do, you're good in the eyes of the supernatural. Like
Right.
that's a horrible lesson to teach kids.
Yeah.
We actually used to do like more Christmas with our kids, and now we've completely sort of moved it over to Future Day, where their stuff is taken from them by the Future Police, and they have to write a contract about how they're going to make the world a better place, and then they get their stuff back with a few toys. And somebody can be like, "Well, why is this better than Santa Claus?" And they get additional toys if they do something that year that like actually makes the world a better place in
Right.
line with their plan. It's because this is a moral framing that doesn't just say the world is good and bad. It explains what good is. Good
Yes.
are actions that make the world a better place for distant future humans, that they would want to reward you for. Good is defined by its effects on the future of humanity.
Yeah.
And this is just like a very easy moral framework that I think most people wouldn't disagree with.
Right.
And so it's a tradition that we can do regularly. So when I tell my kid to fix the world, for example, that's the way that they're framing it, because
Right.
they already talked to me about like the future police said this, the future police did that. Like he was, earlier I was asking him like, well, what do you want to like do specifically these days? And he goes, well, I have to like get educated. I have to learn a lot because the future police need me to be educated so I can do like big things in the future. And so it shows how he has this moral framing here that allows him to say, well, that's silly or that's silly. But if you don't have a system for that silly that can defeat, and I think that this is a big problem that people have, it they just assume that because a system works for them, and this is one of the problems with a lot of the traditional religions, is people in them don't realize that when they went to school, that school was a predominantly Christian school or a predominantly Jewish school, and they didn't grow up having to deal with the types of intellectual challenges or temptations that their children are having to deal with, and the social technologies that they are armed with as adults. From like, if I just tell my kid this, he'll be protected. It's like, no, he won't be, because
Mm-mm.
he's being attacked with weapons that you were not attacked with.
That's right. And that's why I've started using actually the word virtues versus values, because values, especially the way it's used these days, can be a very, malleable, touchy-feely kind of a thing. And it's certainly very subjective, whereas virtues are much more objective. It's a lot easier to sort of measure that something is virtuous versus, vice. And I don't mean it in a religious sense. I mean in a more practical sense. And then also, I think what I like about your system is that because it opens up the whole wide world of information to them, they're more likely to learn why things are as they
Mhm.
are, sort of why the knowledge that we have is the way it is and where we got it and so on. Because if you have a child that, you say, fix the future, what I'm noticing again from today is they don't see the virtue in understanding what is now
Yeah.
and understanding how we got here so you can learn from it and then change. They just think about change. They just think destroy, destroy, destroy. What is bad. And the less whether it's the urban monoculture or the legacy system focuses on the how and the why of what is. So it doesn't open them up to all the knowledge they could possibly look at or study. They just they handpick all the bad things, which of course incentivizes the child to, disregard, destruct and disregard because bad. And they just look at this blank slate of forward. Your child and other children who use a system like this are going to be able to see, sort of all that is, and then think, how do I make what is better? But I'm starting from something. There's a foundation there. And I just think that is a better way to do it. And it also emphasizes the fixing the world from a virtue standpoint rather than just valuing comfort or valuing freedom or valuing equality or something like that. It's like,
Yeah.
what is good?
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of this also, like another thing that provides your child with resistance is a sense of cultural identity.
Mm-hmm.
And the urban monoculture, because the easiest way to deconvert somebody is to convince them that their cultural identity is evil or wrong, because
Yes.
they can build a new one and destroy the old one, right?
Yeah.
So and right now I'm just going into like the way I frame rearing my kids. Like it's not directly related to the school, but it is related to like the way I think about how do I protect my kids in this current environment. Um, a cultural identity can be your family. Like this is what my wife and I value. This is what we stand for. This is what, and it's really good if you can have a few generations of this, or you can point to other family members who are part of that similar cultural group. And this stands in contrast. The really key thing when establishing an identity or a cultural identity is when you are not the majority group, you need to really emphasize we are not the majority group, and the majority group is hostile to us. A group that did a very good job of intergenerationally protecting themselves while not being the majority group are Jewish families. And so you can look at how does a Jewish family in a historic context protect its children from deconversion when they are going to a majority non-Jewish school, because this might be the first time that your maybe Christian cultural subgroup or something like that is sending children to a school that is not aligned with your value system. And we are a minority group. Remember that you could be attacked for saying things that you know to be true. People actually sort of like seeing themselves this way, to the extent that the urban monoculture has had to convince its converts that they are actually like minority freedom fighters, when like every major company is like putting out their flags and putting out, when they control every media organization, but they're like, no, we're
marginalized.
Yeah, but you tell kids that they will be bombarded with a totalitarian sort of fascist regime in our society that pretends to be marginalized and will be hunting them. And I think that this is another thing that's really important in terms of how you engage kids. Because I have a number of my friends where their kids have gotten canceled and had like their lives like really screwed up, and I'm like, look, I understand. We're teaching our kids quite differently. This is like I understand like the value in saying what you believe, but you also need to learn to work within the system as a genuinely marginalized group. As somebody fighting for any sort of like good future for humanity. So I think that that's an important thing to note as well. But you had some questions about uh what was it, like games or online environments? Or
Well, just in general, you've kind of touched on it where you said, screen time in and of itself is not bad. It's that dopamine loop and that intermittent reward system that creates that dopamine loop that is really the problem. So then the next question becomes from parents, and you already answered another one, which is about where's the teacher, and we agree on that one. But I think the last question that most parents would have about this is just sitting in front of a screen itself, because one of the big complaints that parents have now, and one of the things they're looking for in sort of alternatives, is the whole touch grass, get outside. There's a lot of talk about forest schools and so on. And so they're worried, if I plop my child in front of a computer and they do get all transfixed and they're really interested and they start going down these rabbit holes and they want to be there for 5-6 hours at a time, am I harming them, or is it still okay? Because
well,
that will happen to some
yeah.
kids. There's some kids will want to do it. So.
It's designed to work really well on tablets and stuff like that. So if you wanted to, you could throw your kid on this and put him in the woods. Like it doesn't matter where the kid is. One of the things I've noticed was this desire to put kids in more outdoor environments is it's this thing that I hear from parents, and yet, my wife and I could have our kids taken from us if they were caught in the woods by our house. Like the ability for a kid to leave supervision is incredibly difficult in a modern context. Especially at the younger age ranges, right? And so like we're lucky we have a large yard for the kids to play in and everything like that. But I think that people who are like, well, what about the kids being in the woods? These are people who don't have large families and they don't understand that just like, no, like the child police will come and take your kid. Like we've had CPS called on us twice for like our kids wearing used clothes and like playing outdoors while we're supervising them from indoors. Like
Wow.
37% of American children have had CPS called on them.
Well, actually, now that you mention it, In my first house I lived in here in Charlotte, I had my kids playing outside in my front yard. I was watching from inside. I had a new baby, and they were, I think, probably like, 5 and 3,
Hmm.
but they wanted to go outside and just run around in the grass. They had just let their butterflies go. We had butterflies that we raised.
Yeah.
And they were outside running around, and I'm looking through the window. I don't even think they were out there half an hour, and the police were called.
Yeah, this is what I'm
So, I
talking.
mean,
Like,
this is
yeah,
in
you
my
don't
own
get.
yard.
This is the
Yeah.
reality of having kids today. And when somebody's like, "Well, my kids, what if they could?" I'm like, "You don't understand. We're in a freaking police state here. This
Yeah.
is like some like Jewish family during the Holocaust, like hiding in the attic. And one parent's like, "I really think our kids should get more like outdoor time." And it's like, do you understand the circumstances that we're
That's
living
right.
in now? If our kids go outdoors, they'll be taken by the police.
Yeah.
Now, when my kids become teens, would I encourage them to take a tablet and go to the woods and work on this? Yeah, sure. If that's where they want to be,
Sure.
I might even reward them for being in those sorts of environments. Or like, we've got a river by our house, chilling on spend the entire day floating on the
Yeah.
lake, and working on school stuff. Like that could be a really fun thing to do for the kids.
That's
Um,
right.
but I think I've got to create environments where that's realistic for them. And then somebody's like, no, I want my child to like just be learning in the woods. And I'm like, well, there's some medium from learning. Like there's not that much you can learn from just rolling around in the mud. Like I guess they can learn through trial and error what's poisonous and what's not. But like the extent to the things what you mean is you want them in the woods with some medium of education. So that could be an authority, a teacher telling them what's true and what's not true. I don't like that style of education, whether it's in the woods or in a classroom. It could be with a book, which
Yeah.
like, okay, fine. But to me, really, I don't see a big difference between books and screens.
Well,
When books were first released, there was a bunch of panic around book addiction and reading addiction. We just have forgotten. And now we're like, oh yeah, obviously books are broadly a good thing. And I think that in the future, in our kids' generation, they're likely going to be all freaked out like about AI addiction, and anyone who's like screen time, they're going to be like, "What's screen time?" This is like the same way we would regard somebody who's like, "Oh, you can't let your kids spend too much time reading, or they'll become." There was even like when I was growing up, like hints of this still in the background. If you spend all your time reading, you'll become a nerd, and you'll become a four eyes, and your vision will go bad, and you won't be good at sports anymore, and and now nobody would say these things, but these were still like residual like
yeah.
book fears is the new
It's
medium.
it's more important, I think, it's for children to have a variety of experiences when they want them. So, for example, if I had dragged my kids out to the woods every day, I have two who are seriously bug phobic. Like they would be like, "What are you doing? I don't want to
Yeah.
be out here. It's hot. It's humid. There are bugs. I want to go back to reading my books." But then you mentioned the books, and I did have to kind of nudge one of them out of the fantasy genre
Yeah.
because she started getting into that realm. Started with, the Jack and Annie Magic Tree House. That's fine. That's future, time travel, great. But then went into Percy Jackson, all that, and then it just kind of evolved into Redwall. And then and they're great books. Don't get me wrong. But when that's the only genre that your kid is reading, and like everything is happening in another realm, and we get into Tolkien and everything, and they do start to have some outsized expectations of reality. Like they get very disappointed that there are no magical creatures, especially if they get into this stuff at a young age. Like when you're 7 and reading, the trilogy for the Lord of the Rings, then reality looks really boring. So I had to kind of intercede and start saying, I love the reading. Reading's awesome. Let's kind of step out of the fantasy realm. So I think what you're describing is you're just describing a situation where no parents, there is no set it and forget it. You can't just throw them outside into the woods and forget it and everything's going to be hunky-dory. You can't just plop them in front of a screen and set it and forget it either. But to your point, you're probably better off, even if you did set it and forget it with this, than sticking them in front of IXL or social media or YouTube. So it's all about
Yeah.
you, the parent, being involved with the selection and the interaction before and then after and so on, and setting the stage and having the conversations like you're having with your children. And that you have to parent on purpose around these things. No medium is perfect and no medium is pure poison. They have their place, and you just have to think about it rationally and logically and use them to their greatest
Well,
effect.
yeah, I'd say, I mean, and I'm actually going to do an episode on this because I hadn't really thought through this before, but now that we're talking, I'm thinking through this. A lot of parents get, pocket sanded, distracted and confused by the environment that the learning is taking place in, and believe that the environment translates the medium of education
Right.
into something else. So they hear forest school and they think that's not just, a minimum wage authority figure telling children what's true and what's not true because it's happening in the forest and maybe they're a bit more crunchy. It's like, no, it's exactly what's happening in a classroom, with maybe all you're filtering for is a different profile in the authority figure. And the reason why authority figure based learning is so bad in the modern environment is because these people are often, just due to the way teaching works in our country, not very well paid. Like, it's not a very well respected or paid profession, meaning it doesn't get the best and the brightest. It used to, in America, get many of the best and the brightest because women weren't allowed in other professions. And so it could skim the best and the brightest from females who wanted to go into a profession. And that's why the educational system
Well,
kind of
it's
works
beyond
the way
that
it does.
now, to where they are reasonably well paid relative to their private sector counterparts in
Yeah.
other fields with similar training. However, the incentives are not aligned with what parents think they ought to be, which is producing children who know things.
Yeah.
And the incentive instead is playing the system's game. So if you are truly the employee of the system and you do well by the system and play by its authority figures, so you're like the little kid and you look up to those authority figures, then you remain employed and you keep having a good rate of pay.
Yeah.
Well, people who are going to be good teachers, in other words, they're not in it to be an authority figure, they're in it to truly, really inspire and get kids excited about learning. They don't like that. They're not going to long stay in an environment where they're
Absolutely.
rewarded for kissing butt.
Yeah, and so it creates an environment where the people who have my kids' ears and are building their world perspective are going to have ideologies that are very different from mine. They're going to have beliefs that are very different from mine. So that's why I shy away from that. Now, some people, they'll hear this dichotomy of like an authority-based teaching that happens in the woods. They're like, no, my school system in the woods is different. The teaching figure doesn't act like an authority. They act like a friend.
Ew.
And I'm like, you get how creepy that sounds? Like, that's not good. It is infinitely more dangerous that your kid is building a social friendship with some older individual. Like, that's how they incept them with creepy ideas to the max. That you're saying that the kid has even less incredulity about what this person is telling them and has this ideology around like, this person actually cares about me and I'm not a job. Like, that's why I view that as so dangerous. And then they're like, well, books in the woods is fine, but you can get addicted to fantasy books in the woods as well as you can in the house.
That's right.
So it's just the median, the tablet in the woods versus the tablet at home. And then here is where I'd ask people, okay, really, our system doesn't restrict kids to just learning inside, but like, why do you think they're learning more in the woods than they are inside? Like, do
Well,
you
or if
think
you're
the
going
woods
to the
are
woods
like
because you want your kids to
natural?
have fresh air and you want them to appreciate nature and all that, yeah, take an hour at lunch and walk around the woods and then come back. I mean, like, you can do these things. There's nothing that says the reason people get in this headspace, I believe, is they see school bad. Opposite of school must be good. No, no, no. We have this false dichotomous thinking going on in our society right now that if everything's happening indoors at school, then that's the problem. No, that's not the problem. The problem isn't indoors. The problem isn't even having a teacher all the time. It's the kind of people. It's the authority. It's the
Mhm.
knowledge base. It's all of that. And if you think you can just cherry pick one thing out and do its opposite and all will be well, you're completely missing the point. And I think, when it comes down to whether it's the friend thing, the big problem with that is, again, that adds another incentive to attract people working through their issues. What kind of adult wants to be friends with other people's children?
Mhm.
That's weird.
Yeah, well, and then it gets worse. They're like, "Yeah, but we don't go through a public school environment. Like, we went with this crunchy system." And I'm like, "You those
And that's
people
magically
are going
better.
to be even weirder than the ones who are being vetted by the public school. Like, at least the bureaucracy is filtering out the super creeps.
You would
Like,
hope.
well, not always. I mean, actually, they have a really bad case.
Yeah.
I looked recently, and it was something over 1 in 10 kids
Yep.
is SA'd by a teacher by the time they graduate the school system.
Yep.
So something else I note about the school system and the way we're doing this with our own kids, right? Because we built the system predominantly to be the primary educational platform for our own kids. And so a lot of people are surprised that our oldest kid is in public school. They're like, why are you sending your oldest kid to public school? And it's because I want it to be a choice and his choice when he stops going to school. If I make that decision for him, then public school becomes the act of rebellion for him. I need the educational alternative we are presenting him with to be the act of rebellion and not the thing that's forced on him by an authority. And so now I'm just sort of waiting until he decides he doesn't like school, which I know is eventually going to happen. But right now he loves school because it's new and it's interesting and he's engaging with people. And I'm okay with that until I sort of need it until he can fully read, because our system doesn't work well until somebody can read fluently. But I don't think that I think that we also need to be careful in terms of how we relate school to our children, that we don't have them grow up feeling like somebody who is socially isolated by their parents, but instead somebody who was empowered by their parents.
Right. Right. No, I agree with that. And it's tough for me because I genuinely feel like homeschooling is a great option for most people if they can do it. But at the same time, you're absolutely right that if you force it on your children and they're absolutely adamant, I want to try school or I want to go to school, then they're going to be resistant. It certainly works better if you can start from birth. I mean, in other words, if you start homeschooling them even when they're like 2 and 3 years old and they don't know any different, and you build up a little community of other people who are educating their kids the same way, then they're not comparing it to anything.
Yeah.
But if you don't live someplace where there are other people doing that and school is more the norm in your kid's vision, then you have to make some tough decisions and just be aware of what's going on every day so you can, intercede if you need to. In some places, Malcolm, is simply not safe. So that's an important thing. And when I say safe, I don't just mean physically, I mean this psychological torture that can go on. I mean, my daughter was bullied by a teacher in kindergarten. In kindergarten, she was bullied by a teacher. So it can happen at the very first age.
Was she aware? Like, did she want to leave the environment, or was she like happy to be in that environment where she was being bullied?
I would say neither, in the sense that she just wished she had a different teacher. She wanted a different teacher. And then the problem is she couldn't switch. So they don't let you just switch your kid into a different teacher. So it became a problem because, the kids do at that age trust their parents typically. And if you have a good relationship, so they tell you what's going on, this is happening. You investigate further, you find out it is happening. The child is telling the truth. And yet, if you try to do too much to fix it, there can be retribution visited upon the child, which doubles down on the problem. So then your child goes, why aren't you fixing it, mommy or daddy? You're supposed to protect me. And then you run the risk that your trust bond is impaired because they don't understand retribution. They don't understand all the nuances of how difficult it is to try to push back on the system. So what I always tell parents is just work it through, go through all the different scenarios in your mind of how far do you want to take this if you do find yourself in a position where you have to stand up for your child, because it's not easy.
It's interesting. My problem's the exact opposite of yours. My problem is so far, now he's only a few months into school, but so far our kid loves school. And I'm getting this fear like, oh my God, is he never going to want to leave? Like, is he going to decide this is like the greatest thing ever? And so he'll never, I'm waiting for him to get bullied or something, but so far nothing like that's happening.
He may make it all the way through 5th grade. I mean, elementary school in the United States, depending upon where you are, if you're in a nice district, can be just kind of fine, especially with parents like you guys, who I'm sure are teaching him to read and reinforcing reading and all that at home. Where the rubber meets the road is middle school. And that is where all 3 of my children, even, there were 2 who they'd all been homeschooled, but the 2 eldest ones had more homeschooling. They went into public school and they didn't love it, but they didn't hate it. They were like, it's some pros and cons. By the time 6th grade happened, though, they were all like begging, pleading, please get me out of here. I cannot stay here one more day. And then unfortunately, legal reasons I couldn't until COVID. So middle school is so fundamentally different than
Yeah.
elementary school that most kids from good families, let's say, are
Yeah.
going, oh my God. So that's
Well,
probably what.
that's what we're really planning with our kids. I mean, I think
Yeah.
the system really probably works better middle school on anyway. Like if you look at it, you'll immediately be like, yeah, this really probably shouldn't be that engaged with before middle school.
But there
But
are gifted kids though who are ill served in the public system
oh,
that could.
that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this with our kids. That's actually interesting to me, the variation in sort of intelligence and picking up of skills that our various
Yeah.
kids have. With reading, for example, our middle child, well, not middle because we have a few middle children now. The second oldest child is much better than the oldest child at reading. And so we were paying for a reading tutor, and we ended up now we just don't have the tutor meet with the oldest child anymore. We just have him meet with the second oldest, with the goal being that he's eventually going to get jealous. And the way that you have to like manipulate kids into learning stuff and think through their systems. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, he doesn't want to read when he's working with the teacher, but I bet if he sees the teacher working with his little brother and he ends up learning to read, then he's going to get really jealous and learn to read himself.
Right. Or he
Yeah.
just may, I mean, one thing I observed with my own kids was they come to it in sort of phases. And sometimes there's like a little bit of a delay for one, and then they kind of just rapidly catch up to where, you pointed out my eldest child told me for the longest time, I can't read, I can't read, I can't read. And I was getting worried. She turned 7 and I was like, what is going on? Because I've read to this kid since she was up in the womb, like what is happening? And then she just came to me spontaneously one day and asked for more of those, she called them Jack and Annie books. And I said, what do you mean? They're like 40 on the shelf. She said, oh, I've read them all. I'm like, what? So what happened was she didn't want to tell me and she didn't want to demonstrate that she could read till she could do it perfectly. She was that kind of perfectionist. Like, I'm going to pretend I don't know how to do it till I know how to do it like rock solid. And yet her younger sister, 2.5 years younger, I thought was way ahead. It's like, how, because she was demonstrating, I'm reading, look at me, mom, I'm reading all over the place. And what ended up happening is they were actually at the same level, even with your difference, but the eldest just didn't want me to know. It was kind of like, I have a standard that I have to hit before you see me do it. It was really strange. So, I mean, and then what I also learned is that they can both decode equally, but one had a greater sensitivity to comprehension in terms of just understanding the story than the other one. So very different how they approach it.
And another thing we're really going to have to work on as parents, this generation, and people who don't people who don't get AI yet or think it's like a fad or like not that big a deal, you are doing the same disservice to your kids that parents in our generation who thought the internet was a fad did to their kids. Maybe even bigger than that. Because when like the good AIs to use, like for example, Perplexity does a very good job of sourcing its answers. So a kid can check the sources that the AI is relying on to make certain knowledge-based claims. Or, different AIs are useful. Some AIs are useful if like the kid wants to learn to code. Like you don't like need to learn to code in the way people used to learn to code. And this is actually one thing that annoys some coders in the way that our skill tree is based, is the very first step we have in the learning to code is learn how to use an AI to build code for you before we go down learning any of the individual coding pathways. And a lot of coders are like, well, that'll teach bad habits. And I'm like, bad habits for your generation, not for the coming generation, where they, if you're going to learn to be an artist these days, one of the, like a digital artist, like in some sort of digital art career,
right?
The first thing you should probably be learning is how to be good at prompt design for AI. Because that's going to be where a lot of digital art is coming in the future. And people will come to me and they'll be like, oh, the art created by AI isn't that good. Or like the answers created by AI aren't that good. And I'm like, well, I mean, they're pretty damn good. And this stuff has only been around for like 4 years at this point. Okay.
The only thing I have a problem with as far as AI, well, there's two things. One, I think it's misnamed. So I think that's what scares a lot of people, is that it's actually not necessarily intelligence. If we define intelligence, it's just extraordinarily powerful, knowledge and I don't know how you would, information service type of thing. But the other problem I have is intellectual property. I do believe in private property and I believe in intellectual property. And I think that when you have these large language models that have prompts for art and they're going out and they're scraping without permission other people's product, and like Adobe's about to be doing or is
Yeah.
doing, then I just philosophically and ethically, I have a problem with that. So it's not that I have a problem with the machine drawing a picture. It's I have a problem with the machine drawing a picture using or making photographs of people who never existed, using people's photographs who do exist without asking their permission. And then, doing
Yeah.
this whole thing.
Well,
And
I
that
just
bothers me.
I think that it's important to keep in mind that you can have your own moral concerns about how the AI models were trained and everything like that, but still understand the functional question. Does your moral concerns about, like, for example, if you look at the development of like vaccines, for example, all sorts of horrible things were done in terms of experimentation to develop modern vaccines. That doesn't mean that I would deny my kid a modern vaccine because of all of the people that were like tortured or the Tuskegee experiments or, whatever. Like, I would deny them modern medicine because of the horrible stuff that
Oh
was done
no.
to build
I
modern
wouldn't
medicine.
say I wouldn't say deny it. What I'm saying is more along the lines of just making sure that we also take pains to teach kids how to, first of all, protect their own data, protect their own, identities and so on for safety, but also to be, sort of respectful and mindful of the fact that they are synthesizing the, information
Right. I
from
mean,
the,
they can be as mindful of that fact
yeah,
as the point I guess I'm making is, for example, if I'm a graphic designer in the future, right?
right.
Um, and I had a parent who was like, it's unethical to learn to use AI image generation, which is true. And so I don't hone my skills on that while also honing other graphic design skills. In 10 years, 20 years, I go into the job market. I'm not
Right.
going to be able to get a job if I'm competing with people who do know how to use AI
Well,
effectively.
that is true.
So it's one of these things where it's like, yeah, think it's ethically questionable as well, but the cat's out of the bag, and I want my kids to be able to put food on the table.
Right.
And somebody could be like, well, the work won't be as good, and it's like it almost doesn't matter. They can work at like 10x the speed because they can use it to generate ideas for things. They can use it for generating models of things.
Hmm.
And where it really comes in, and this is where like I think our generation doesn't get stuff, is the ways that people who get super sophisticated at using AI use AI actually look very different than the ways that I've seen that people who aren't sophisticated use it. Like the ways that people who aren't sophisticated, they think like, I'm going to go to AI and I am going to, ask it how to write a good essay. And it's like, that's
Right.
not the way sophisticated people use it. A sophisticated person goes to one AI and they go, what's a good prompt that I could ask an AI for grading and helping me with an essay that I just wrote? And then the first AI will generate the prompt. Then they'll use that prompt and they'll post it into the AI with the essay that they wrote. And then the AI will help them analyze their own writing. Or they may even think it's in terms of like how you think about engaging with AI. Like the unsophisticated person with AI thinks, oh, I should ask AI this question or this question. When the sophisticated person with AI thinks, I should ask AI what questions I should be asking AI to achieve this end goal. Like
Right.
go to an AI and ask, how could I use an AI to become a better writer? Instead of, asking specific end questions. And this is going to become very important in the way that our kids learn information, in the same way that in our generation, it was important to learn to use the internet to source information, because the internet was the
Yeah.
predominant place that information is sourced in our generation. In our kids' generation, just as a kid who spent his entire childhood like learning the Dewey Decimal System and like how to navigate a library was pretty much like just straight out competed by a kid who got good at using the internet.
Yeah.
Kids in our generation and this next generation are going to be who specialize in gaining information from like a Googling, are going to be straight out competed by kids who gain information through knowing the right AI to use and how to engage with that AI. And
Right.
our school system uses some elements of that, but
Right.
I just think that that's also something when we're educating our kids to keep in mind.
Well, the point that you're making, it sounds like, is, our children need to learn how to effectively and intelligently outsource.
Yeah.
And that is something I think a lot of people don't understand. And because when you hear them complain, they'll say, well, they're just going to have AI do their homework. And I'm like, well, if they do, they'll fail. That's not going to be good enough. To your point, if they don't learn to use this in a sophisticated way, and if they don't learn how to create on their own and then use the AI to amplify what they can do and can create, they'll be just as left behind as the kids who may have gotten good grades in school, but they just knew what boxes to check and how to please the teacher. They're not the top achievers in life either. The people who got ahead were the ones who could take what they knew and then apply it or do something extraordinary with it. So, and sometimes they were the C students. They weren't necessarily the A students.
Well, I'm gonna push back here. If a kid today is going to public school and they are using the current generation AI, like the latest models that have been put out by ChatGPT, they're going to be acing everything if the AI is just doing it for them. If you look at surveys of like how many kids at like the top colleges are using AI for huge chunks of the assignments they turn in, it's shockingly large. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's
no, I know. Large. But what I'm saying is then they're in there doing your brain surgery and they can't take a break to go ask ChatGPT what to do. They certain have some has to stay up here.
Well, this is the point I'm making is kids learning to develop these skills. And this is one of the reasons when I had this big question in like the design of the tree, like 8 questions versus a number of questions that would actually judge their skill at something. One of the reasons I went to 8 questions is I was like, this generation, the generation that's growing up now, will always have an option to cheat that we didn't have.
Right.
They will always have this option to cheat. And if I try to prevent them from cheating by monitoring them, they are going to get around that, or they are going to, etc. I need to develop a system where they decide not to cheat because they decide they actually want to know this information and that they will actually be better off for knowing this information.
Yes.
Which is, I think, intellectually something that we didn't really need to deal with when we were kids. We never had a moment where, but then there's the secondary thing, which is the people who are like, I think it's the equivalent of in our generation, the people who are like, well, you won't always have a calculator with you. And it's like, well, yeah, so it turns out that we do always have calculators with us. The people who told us that were just straight wrong. And the kids who went into the math test with a calculator hidden under the table, they were both acing the math test and they're acing math in real life. And I think that this was actually a huge problem with the way math is taught in our generation, is the kids who are using AI or calculators to augment their ability to study a subject are going to be the kids who disproportionately succeed at the highest levels of that subject. So if you look at something like math for our generation, there was a number of people who like just stopped math because they had to do it in their heads and they didn't like doing it. And then and I've heard this from other people, some of the people I've talked to who that happened to, then they went to college and they ended up getting PhDs in math. And it's like, wait, why'd you get a PhD in math? And they're like, well, it turns out the type of math you do at the highest level of math is nothing like the type of math that you're going to quit a math class for doing because you didn't have your calculator. It's the type of math where you're not just using calculators, you're using advanced software to run calculations for you that you as a human could never run. The most advanced types of math that are done at like PhD level now are done with like computer augmented assistants. If you're doing neuroscience, like I promise you this, if one of my kids becomes a neuroscientist, they are not going to have a scalpel in one hand and be directly cutting somebody's brain. We already have robots assisting with surgery. I don't know if you've seen these robots, but they create surgeries that like heal much faster because the cuts they make are so microscopic compared to the cuts that human hands make. The neurosurgeons of the future are going to be doing it through AI. They will be doing it through specific prompting types within these I think it's called like the Galileo system, the one they use right now, within these microscopic movements that no human could ever do, tailored to exactly what
like that's why nanorobotics is such a big field right now. No, I mean you're absolutely right. I think the point is that parents need to understand the difference and they need to make clear to their children the difference. So, like you said, learning the prompts, learning how to think. What you're describing is the process of learning how to think. And
Yeah.
this is what's not really happening in the legacy system. And what at first glance anyway, notice about your system is it seems to encourage, even though to some people it might look like an ADD kid's dream come true, right? It still encourages thinking, because the way that I believe the average person using this is going to use it is they're going to pursue things as they are connected to other thoughts and other information that they want to learn, a purpose that they're trying to achieve. And that is actually how we function in the real world. That is actually how we learn and apply information. So I that's what's missing for me in the legacy whole world, is that it's very passive. There is no agency. The body of knowledge is defined for you and handed to you. And I just don't think that you learn to think
Oh,
that way.
absolutely. No, no. Being taught passively is just like, it's obviously a bad idea. It's so interesting that the legacy school system like exists, and it's just so obviously a bad idea.
Yes.
When we have kids, when we first had videos, it began to make sense to ask the question of, why is my kid being taught by like Mrs. Bureaucrat instead of the number one person in the world at this subject? Because we have a video now, like there isn't a
Yes,
lock on their
exactly.
time. And now we're in AI and internet era, and it's like, okay, like this is just silly at this point. This is designed for like a pre-industrial civilizational system.
Absolutely.
But another thing that you'll note is people look at the tree and they're like, what if, because the original version of the tree that we had planned was designed to ensure that there was some degree of well-roundedness. And we ended up dropping this. It had like a banding system where like kids couldn't go too far in one section unless they had done a certain amount in another section. People go, why did you drop all that banding? And it was because the only people who wanted it were people who were fans of the legacy system. Whenever I would go to somebody who had taken their kids out of the legacy system, they're like, I don't want my kid to have that. Like, what, can I take that out? And I started thinking about, why is this the case? And it's like, oh, because well-rounded is stupid. And people are like, what do you mean well-rounded is stupid? In the world of outsourcing and AI, there is nothing more replaceable than a well-rounded person. The school system was designed to create well-rounded students because it was trying to create interchangeable gears for a bureaucratic and world system where somebody with X GPA could be exchanged by anyone else who had an equivalent GPA. But the problem is now that we have outsourcing and now AI, the well-rounded kid is the single most disposable human in the world. They are competing with people in India and AIs, and they are not going to work in the future. Not only do you need lumpy skills in the future, that is, you need kids to be able to lean into their strengths and their passions. But in addition to having a degree of lumpiness, you need, the most important thing to teach kids is individual agency and ambition,
Yes.
because they need to be the type of generation. I do not, what's going to happen with AI is like the middle class is just going to be completely hollowed out. You'll have like manual jobs and stuff like that, but most of the like thinking type jobs, right? Where it required some level of like bureaucratic pencil pushing. Those can all be done better by AI basically already, much less in 10 or 20 years. So then the question becomes, well, then how do you succeed? And we're seeing this in the tech world right now. Like I used to be in venture capital, and I know all the people in VC right now, and they're like, it's so weird seeing the companies coming out now, like the big, really hot ones, is they're like 3 guys in the US who are like super smart, an outsourced team of like 50 people in like the Philippines, and then all the rest are AI agents. And they're like, if you go like, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and you're looking at like Google or Facebook or TikTok, growing, these were giant companies where you'd have these
Right.
giant offices filled with coders and everything like that, because they needed individual humans. You could just like get good at a skill and someone would hire you. But the people who are going to be really successful in the next ecosystem that we're walking into, they need to be the type of people who have sort of a mindset where they're looking for problems in the world, where they can build arbitrage and they can build out systems. Basically, the entrepreneur is the only one with any level of job security in the world that we're going into. And if
Yeah.
you
And unfortunately, this is what I've covered here a lot on this channel. They've retooled the schools. And when I say I'm talking about sort of the sort of global feudalists
yeah,
to produce the reason they want to focus on affective learning rather than effective is they want children to have a certain affect so that whatever their lot in life that is going to be assigned to them, because that's what's going to end up happening if you are not an entrepreneur or you are not, using that agency and figuring out what you want to do and what you want to own, you will be assigned. You will be told this is your job and this is what you're going to do and this is how it's going to be, or you'll be absolutely homeless. You won't have anything to do at all. And you need to be able to receive that very passively and gratefully and be excited about doing it, because why wouldn't you be? You're giving to the collective. So if that's not cool with you, that your child's going to be a human widget, then you probably want to focus on a different way of learning.
Well, and I also go into another thing that's going to change in the economy, and I'm already seeing this change, and it's a big mistake that a lot of parents are making. Now, our school system doesn't really focus on this as much. There's some pathways on how to use social media well, but I've noticed some parents like ban their kids from social media, and they think they're doing the kid a favor. And I'm like, oh my God, you do not understand how much you're hurting the kid by doing that. In the like, social media has negative effects on kids. I'm not like, that is 100% true. But the problem is it's also, as the college system is deteriorating. It used to be the core way that we judged status in our society in terms of like, I want to hire this person, or I want to work with this person or this person, was what college they went to. I mean, that was just true. Like, I've got, my St. Andrews undergraduate degree, and I've got a degree from Stanford, an MBA from Stanford. And it used to be that was the golden ticket in society. That was the thing that could open any door, any investor, any relationship for me. Well,
Right.
as the elite institutions increasingly become woke and are not admitting people or grading people based on their competence,
Right.
individuals in fields where they need to judge people by their competence and not by their, so for example, the big bureaucracies, they still hire out of the university system, right? Like, that's still their competent, because they actually care. Like, if I'm going to work at one of these big bureaucracies, how woke I am. And the university system is sort of combining a wokeness score with some degree of competence score. And so that, I'm going to like work at some big company. They don't care. But like the VCs and the entrepreneur world, this world has to care
Yep.
how competent somebody really is. And
Mhm.
so it's generally the leading trend on where the way people look at competence is going.
Yep.
And there are two core competence indicators that are now used to determine somebody is going to hire you for an ultra high level position. Category one, nothing to do with social media. It's kids who have other people have given money to. When I say that, these are kids that have gone through Y Combinator. These are kids that have gone through 500 startups. These are kids that have gotten into an Atlas fellowship with effective altruism. These are kids who have gotten Teal fellowships. Basically, these are kids who at a young age proved themselves so competent that somebody else that was good at judging competence decided to give them money. And it makes a lot of sense that that would be like an ultimate indicator of competence to other individuals. We pay to go to universities. We basically pay universities to tell other people that we're competent. If somebody's giving you money because they think you're going to turn that into more money, that's a really high indicator of competence. So that has been one of the areas where, but the other is how many people are following and who those people are has become a core indicator of competence within these crowds. If I'm going to collab with somebody like going forwards, what do? They will check to see how many followers I have on Twitter. They'll check to see how many followers I have on YouTube. They'll check who those followers are. So they go to Twitter and they go, is this person followed by competent people that I also follow? Right. Like,
right.
And when they see that there's an overlap in like competent people who they trust are following me, they're like, okay, I will take the time to engage with this person or maybe work with this person. Now, the parents who are shielding their kids from social media, that's like shielding your kid from college in the last work paradigm.
Interesting.
And so it's putting them in this environment where they're not going to be able to compete as well. And it's not to say that they won't be able to get jobs, but they will be working at the highest levels of society, like securing venture capital investment, securing extra top tier talent at a significant hindrance. And I also think that people underestimate how significant this hindrance is, because it's one thing that I've been noticing recently is, we get covered in the media all the time. Like, there's about to be another Wall Street Journal piece on us coming out in the near future. If like people Google us, like we're normal media all of the time. And so I'm able to judge fairly well how many people are actually reading these normal stories when they don't go viral. And it's basically none. I'd guess that if you're in like a mainstream news article, the number of people who read one of those that doesn't go viral, okay, just like a standard, like let's say bottom of the front page on the New York Times,
Right.
the number of people actually reading those these days is probably, I guess, if I'm equating conversions, i.e., like people who decide to follow us on Twitter from one of those versus like us appearing on a YouTube channel, I'm guessing it's probably equivalent to like 50K views.
Mhm.
Now, a person can be like, well, that's a lot of views, except it's not really a lot of views for an online ecosystem. Like small time influencers are getting that many views on like TikTok or YouTube or stuff like that. And
Right.
yet there's people who work their entire lives to like work their way up to be like a New York Times writer or editor or something like that, not realizing that just not that many people trust the legacy media anymore.
Right.
We're going to be doing an episode on this soon, but like people aren't paying attention to these legacy systems.
It's probably good because some of the legacy stuff that's been written about you guys is brutal.
Yeah, well,
And
people only read
and
it when it goes viral, so we try to make it go viral. Like we aim to
oh, so
get
you try to be as controversial as
Oh yeah, nobody. So I'm not saying that people never read the legacy stuff. We can get
yeah.
tons of conversions if we can make a piece go viral. So the
Right.
key value of the legacy system is to bait them into making something goes viral. But
Oh,
like
I get it. Okay.
humorously, this like works really well for people who are conservative leaning, because like hate goes viral better than anything else, and the legacy media, like it won't hate on like progressive causes, but it'll hate on conservative causes for like very little things, which means that conservative causes go viral much more frequently than progressive causes do these days. I didn't
That's
used to be the case. It's
interesting.
really interesting.
That is
um
interesting.
I
But
mean,
I
like
mean,
when was the last time like
like
something
the stuff that
environmentally
they get,
viral?
the stuff that they get, the people that animates people to go viral, though. Um, I mean, it's kind of far afield from talking about the school, but have you gotten people to talk about or what you're doing with this school, with the
Well, I mean,
institute?
we've been mostly focused on the pronatalist advocacy, and so we haven't tried to
Okay,
make anything tied to the school go viral. Because I mean, our real goal for a while here was to secure the pronatalist movement as a mainstream movement in the new right, and to build ourselves as a sort of the unassailable leaders of that movement.
right,
And we've really achieved both of those things, and that helps us then distribute things like educational platforms and stuff like that. Like
right,
in terms of
right.
like educational influencers, I know pretty much all of the top ones. We're not pitching on our school with them right now because I want the team we have that's like reviewing everything to take out all the mistakes the AIs have made,
I got
like
you.
all the wrong questions, all the bad sources, and replace them with working things. So I'm probably wait 6 months and let this team sort of crawl on it. I mean, we're putting a lot of money into this. This is going to have at least $500,000 put into this. And it's all free. It's not monetized in any way. So hopefully, and if people are like, oh, I want to suggest other nodes or something like that, yeah, just go and suggest it. Like this is a crowdsourced project. It's like a Wikipedia without risk of institutional capture because, well, I wrote a book on governance theory and how to avoid institutional capture by the monoculture. So people really don't need to worry about that.
I
But
think the
yeah,
thing that the main message I want people to take away from this show is that you can do two things. You can keep putting your kids in the legacy system and complain about it. That's an option.
yeah.
Or you can innovate or hook up with innovators like you. So in other words, you can take an alternate path. I meet too many people who spend too much of their time, in my personal opinion, and their children's valuable time sort of beating their head against the brick wall of what is, and complaining about it and saying how terrible it is. And one could accuse me of doing this. Well, this is not what you do on your channel. Like, no, but I do it to help people recognize, first of all, you have the power now. It's like, Glenda the Good Witch, click your heels together. You have the power right now to go a different way. You just have to decide to do it. And there are people like you and Simone who are taking the reins and saying, here's a way. And I'm just bringing it to you and say, here's a way. You don't tell me there is no way. There are ways. Now, you might not like this way, but don't say there aren't any, because there are. And if you don't like this one, then you go make a Collins Institute of your own, or you go make something else. But you don't sitting back there and saying like, oh, wah, or fix the existing thing. and keep trying to make it better, when, to your point, it's been tried. It's been like 150 plus years now.
Yeah.
Enough.
Oh yeah, no, and this is really where we come to think. That I try to have the mindset that I want my kids to have. Oh, the school's not working, then I'll make a new one.
Thank you.
And that I approach this, and I think a big problem the way a lot of people approached it historically is they approached it by saying, okay, what's wrong with the school system, and how do I change the existing model to address those problems? Whereas we just said, okay, I want my kids to be broadly informed about the world and be able to get a good job and be able to, compete in the economy. What's the best way I can get them to that end state, without any sort of review of the existing school system, any sort of
Right.
review. And I had realized, and it actually kind of shocked me, with all the people who complain about the educational system, the people who have tried like genuinely novel models that aren't just like moving one metric, there's not many of them.
No.
There's like 2 or 3 really. And it's really surprising to me. And when you talk to people who are like education PhDs, I had one who was like, that's not true. And I was like, okay, like name, like, how is this genuinely different? And they couldn't. And this is where, if people are wondering like why the education space sucks so much, if you look by IQ, like people going into different PhD programs, people going into education PhD programs have an IQ of 100. They have an exactly average IQ. It is the lowest of like any college degree.
I keep telling people, even though I'm not on a PhD, I have a master's degree, but I keep telling them I've been inside the belly of the beast, and it was not fun being the smart kid on the short bus. And I don't mean to like toot my own horn, but it really was. It really was.
How much of it, if you got an education degree, was just them telling you what to believe? Like, how much of it was ideological indoctrination versus like teaching?
98%.
Ideological indoctrination. Yeah.
Oh,
So
100%. I mean, it was crazy. I really felt like I came out of there feeling like I had spent 18 months of my life, and the only good thing out of it was I had some practice. I had a year of student teaching. I was in the classroom for a year and went to classes at night. But the classwork I did was utterly useless to me in terms of teaching. It could not have been more useless. In fact, if I had done what they tried to get me to do, which was essentially believe things, if I had believed the things about my students and about learning and about teaching that they wanted me to believe, I'd probably still be there. But because they couldn't get me to do that, because my values and my belief system were so rock solid before I set foot in graduate school, that it was like going to Mars or going into like sub-Saharan Africa and having somebody going, hey, here's the belief system you should have, and be going, no, I'm a Westerner. No. So this is how it felt. And there was no way that I was going to adopt that. And foolishly, I think I kept thinking, well, that's okay. I'll just ignore it. I'll have the credential. And I know for a fact there are kids going to college today who do that. Say, well, I'll have the piece of paper. I'll just ignore all this. I'll get the grades and I don't need to incorporate. Super. You've just wasted tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars and all kinds of time that you could have been in the market, in the world, doing things and moving your life forward. But instead, you were just sitting there passively, letting crap go in one ear out the other. And that's essentially what I did for 18 months. I just sat there going, you're nuts. Okay, moving on. And it was a total waste of my time.
Yeah.
Total waste of my time.
And the credentials, they still access some things, but it's increasingly becoming only the wokest of woke institutions do the credentials gain you access into anymore.
Or with the wokest woke people. So people say, where did you go to graduate school? And if I say I went to the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania, that's a disqualifier in the circles in which I would like to operate. In other words, if I want to go and do one of these woke things or whatever, they'd be more than happy to have me, but I will have to like genuflect to the, Church of Woke. If I try to work amongst people who are fighting that and they see Penn, GSE, they're like, are you maybe a plant? Are you going to be a spy? But they don't trust me. And I almost can't blame them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and I think that this is, when you talk about that, because everyone here is experiencing some degree of this right now, something that is very important to think about in terms of how you are educating your kids, because one of the goals of education is employment and ability to make different changes in the world.
That's right.
Is I have told you within my communities what the way they judge status and knowledge. You need to judge that within your own communities. You need to be asking, if they're not judging competence by what college somebody went to, what are they judging competence and trustworthiness by? And how can you ensure that your kids have that? In my world, that's followers, right? Like that's what it is in like VC world these days. But what is it in your world? And make sure that your kids have a pathway to access that.
That's right. And I couldn't agree with that more. That is so important. And you do need to be thinking about these things. There is, like I said, there's no set it and forget it. And there's no clear, career and college promise pathways. They talk about that in public school. And it really does pain me how many people just think if I put my kid on this track, all will be well. And, the people who thought that back, let's say, in the first part of the Industrial Revolution, woke up and found out their kids were working in factories.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't want your kid to be the 21st century equivalent of a factory worker, no shame on factory workers that just being replaced with robots. That's the fact. I'm not making a judgment about the person. I'm just telling you the jobs are going away. And so if you don't want that for your child, you have to think about, something else, something different.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean, it's, and this matters more for parents of this generation than it mattered for us.
yes.
So the point I'm making here is because AI is hollowing out the middle class, or middle class like jobs, like blue collar knowledge worker jobs, or I guess like low level white collar jobs. We're moving into a world where like there's basically two castes of people. It's the slaves and the people who matter. That's the world that we're moving into. And if your kid isn't in the group of people who are like producing things that other people want using the new technology, their quality of life is going to be so astronomically lower than your quality of life is when contrasted with the people who are economically above.
That's right. And I mean, really, people have asked me, why is there such a push for equity and equal outcomes? I'm like, because there are people who recognize this and they're afraid. They're genuinely afraid. And so they're acting, in my opinion, out of a combination of they're genuine communists, some of them, and others are just terrified that all of these people from the hollowed out middle class are going to wake up one day and get pretty darn pissed off at the people who are not, who figured it out sooner, and they need to be mollified.
Well, it's so true. People always ask me, they go, well, won't people eventually get so angry or so downtrodden that they rise up? And I'm like, okay, first of all, my company does a ton of business in Venezuela. The level of downtrodden people need to be to rise up
so bad.
Is so bad. It's like stepping over your
It's eating your pets bad. It's eating your pets bad.
It's eating your pets bad.
Yes.
It's walking over friends' bodies on the way to the grocery store bad. Like it is not like a normal level of bad like you might be thinking. Like you're struggling to buy food some weeks. Like no. It is horrifying to an extent that you can't imagine. Don't be like, okay, well, wait for that point. But then the second problem is in every time in human history where there has been a revolution that ended up helping the lower classes gain more status, it was during a time where the wealthy needed the lower classes more. In Athens, the poor gained the right to vote because the wealthy needed them to protect their trade routes because they needed unskilled people to man the triremes. In when the Magna Carta was written, that was just after the Black Plague that lowered the number of serfs and increased the power of the nobility and the serf classes and increased wages there. With AI, I say AI is the tool that finally cuts the bourgeoisie's the tether that the bourgeoisie always had to the proletariat. They needed the proletariat for something.
Right.
A future revolution, people will rise up, and it's like, you'll rise up against what? Automated gun drones? You won't stand a chance. It's not tanks anymore. It's giant autonomous swarms of gun drones. If you're not in the class that either controls the gun drones or the people who control the gun drones don't have an interest in listening to you and learning from you, you're going to be in a very difficult place vis-a-vis our ancestors. We are entering an era where the poor lack the ability to rise up. And people hear this and they go, oh, but surely they will. And I'll be like, and this just shows that the education system has failed you. That was the norm in human history. A very few aristocratic elite class, and then tons and tons of people barely scraping by.
That's
We
right.
just are returning to the norm again. And
That's right.
you get to decide which category your family falls into, because unlike
Right.
previous systems, I think this new system that we're entering into is going to be much more genuinely meritocratic. Mostly because there's just not going to be that many people with that much talent left, given that most people who are from cultural groups that are technologically productive aren't having kids.
Right. Well, and that's where the pronatalism comes in, and really,
Yeah.
should. So no, I agree. And when people hear us talk this way, they get all twitchy and like, oh my God, it's so grotesque and harsh. And don't you care about these other people? I'm like, well, they should care about themselves. I mean, I can't care about you and your kids more than you care about you and your kids. That's not my job. It's not that
Yeah.
I'm inhuman and I have no human feeling. That's not the point. The point is that if the goal is survival and advancement of humankind, if that's just like the overarching goal, then the amount that I can care about, like deeply care about, is very, very limited to me and mine. And it should be
Well,
for
yeah.
everybody.
I think that the people who are going out there was like they'll tell me how the world should work with no mechanism of action for achieving that outcome.
That's
And then
Marxism.
yeah, and then they will build that. Yeah, sometimes when people come to me and they go, "Wow, how could you, think like this?" Again, I'm going to go back to that analogy of like, I feel like we're the like Jewish family in the attic, and one person's like, the world should be more equal. Like we should go out and like protest for like more equality or like advocate for it at the political level and teach our kids to work for it. I'm like, do you not like understand that we are like the marginalized group here? We are the revolution. We can be deplatformed. I could have my YouTube channel taken down at any moment just for saying things that are obviously true. Like our videos, always we get our videos demonetized. Like I had one demonetized recently because we talk about like the question of why is it that communist groups so frequently try to lower the age of consent? This was like a fact-based historical discussion, and YouTube's like, no, we can't have people learning about this. We just getting any message out there today is difficult. And to say that, okay, you're trying to build better systems, maybe you could build your kids with a value set to try to make society better, fine. But be realistic about the society that they're moving into. There isn't anything that I personally can do about the way that AI is changing the market. It's very much to like you coming to me and being like, well, AI is being trained in unethical ways, and me being like, I don't have any control over that, so I like don't really think about it that much. And it's the same with my kids. I'm not building any tool for my kids that I am not giving to the entire world for free. Right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's true.
I
Yeah,
have a
I guess what I'm saying, though is that I mean maybe I am a little bit of a Luddite in the sense that I think there still is a role to be played by hand created or like human generated things and art and stuff.
I
Um
agree. I agree with that
so
too. But I think the future, the human generated stuff of the future is going to look like the Collins Institute. It'll be like first it was created by AI, and then like a swarm of humans go in and correct all of the mistakes, which is what we're working on now.
right. So, I mean, all in all, I think the bottom line is that what I want, like I said, what I want parents to take away from this is an alternative. This is an alternative that is designed around how the world actually works. It is designed around how humans actually learn and what is actually fun, which can, by the way, be measured. A lot of people forget that it can be measured. And so if you're looking for a way for your children to be educated, that does all that and gives you the opportunity to have to still work, like you, the parent, can still, if you work from home, for example, or even like you said, this works on a tablet. If you can bring your child somewhere, this is portable. You don't need to have them in a specific setting. You just really need to have a device and some Wi-Fi, access to the internet, and they can learn whenever they want, and it's free. That's the best part. So many people are coming to me saying, I can't afford this, I can't afford that, and here's the, here it is, and it's free. So it addresses so many of the concerns right out of the gate that make it automatically better than what we're paying an awful lot of money for that
Yeah.
isn't working.
A few immediate concerns that people will come to me with that I just want to address here. So people will go to this. Obviously, it still needs improvement. I'm letting people know that right now. It needs editing. But that doesn't mean that because it needs editing today, that it's a bad tool for your children. Editing what's wrong in this and learning to find what's wrong in this can be part of the educational process for somebody's kid. The kid running into questions that have wrong answers, or something that's not where it's supposed to be, that can be a useful, that doesn't like significantly lower its value as a learning tool.
Right.
And you as a parent, if you're like, you have something that you're really interested in, like one of the guys recently who went into it is really interested in like the Maoism, and so he went into it and he was editing all that stuff. And I love that. That's how it's going to get better. The other thing I'd note is if you want to like do it in a group setting with a number of other kids, like you're like a pod person, we have accounts for like teachers that you can go in and manage a number of student accounts and monitor a number of student accounts and even do grading for the student accounts if you want to do that. So we have systems like that. We also have, oh God, there was something else I wanted to note here. I guess I don't remember.
I love that idea though, that you can have for those parents who really do want their children to interact with other students, to whether it's in a Socratic situation where you're asking questions and bouncing ideas off each other or whatever. There are some kids who really enjoy that. That you can do it. There's nothing
Yeah,
stopping you from doing it.
and as it gets larger, we're going to build social communities around this and stuff like that. It's just that right now we don't have that many students using it at any given time. So
Right, right.
and oh yeah, I remember the point I wanted to make. So the way I tried to build the system, when you mentioned it being fun, and you see, I'm even holding to this with my kids. I will not make my kids use this system. I wanted to create a system that I didn't need to make my kids use. I wanted them to see it as one tool available to them in all of the ways they could learn about the world. And if I have done a good job, it will be the best tool they feel they have access to, where best is, use like utility divided by fun. And I think that I've built that. When I engage with it, I'm like, I wish I could just spend like weeks on this. But I'm also open to improve that. And that's really the mindset that we've taken with this with parents. If parents are like, how do I force my kid to use this or monitor them or etc. That's really, you can do that. Like we have parent accounts that you can use to monitor like one student accounts, but that's not the mindset or design philosophy that we were using when we put this together.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, you want them to want to do it. That said, I will say that there is something to be said for encouraging your children to give things a try and before they write something off. So whether it's this or any other modality, if you have chosen it thoughtfully and you think it's worth giving a shot, there's something to be said for encouraging your children to make informed decisions, right? That informed consent thing. And I see a lot of times kids, especially if they've come out of school, let's say a parent wants to pull their kid out of school and have them do something like this. If it's different, they'll say no. If it's not what they're used to, they'll say no before they even look at it.
Mhm.
And I think this is where parents can play a role and say, look, I'll tell you what, give it a shot for an hour, just play around and see what about, and then come back and tell me what you thought, is not asking a lot of your child. You're not really
No.
forcing them to do it. You're just saying, I want you to make decisions that are informed decisions, not, I don't recognize it. It's different from what I know. I'm ignoring it.
Well, while letting them know that the initial system is going to have a lot of mistakes and we do need help in fixing them,
Sure.
but they can
Well, they
consider
might
that
like
part of the
that.
educational
That might
process.
be actually a selling point.
Yeah. Well, that they get to, have input in this
That's what I'm
system.
saying. Yeah.
Eventually, we're going to make it so that the kids even get scores based on how much they're editing stuff and how good their edits are, because I figured that could be like a fun side thing. It's like, not only are you learning stuff, but you're looking for ways to improve the system.
Sure.
But yeah, I
I
really
did.
appreciate it. And I appreciate you, maybe bringing more attention to this. And yeah, I'm just really, really excited to finally have this be live. And I do think it will be what my kids end up using, but
Well, we'll see.
I don't
But I
know.
mean,
It'll be their
the
choice.
main the main point though is that if we're going to have a renaissance, for lack of a better word, in education in the West, people have to actually do new things. So what you guys have done is you've stuck your neck out there, both financially and just physically, and you're doing that. And that is something that I applaud, and I always want to platform that because um, we've got to try a bunch of different things, and I really think this has got a lot of promise, so I'm excited to see how
Yeah.
it grows, and hopefully we'll check back in with you in 6
Very
months or a year
excited. I had a
and see
final
how it
thought
goes.
here that was based on something you were mentioning before, which is this concept of like, well, I must have this really elitist mindset that I think that the future is going to be much more, class divided, and that a person's skill set is going to matter a lot more, and like their education is going to matter a lot more. And people are like, that's such an elitist mindset. And I'm like, it's such an odd way that like the word elitism, like I literally went out there and built for free an educational system that I'm giving to anyone who wants it, right? With the goal that it can help as many people reach this elite category as possible. But I do believe this elite category exists. Like, I think that, if somebody didn't take the time when they were younger to educate themselves and explore the world and learn about all of the different things in the world, like, is it wrong that they have access to a lower quality of life as an adult? I mean, I don't know if I'm like, I'm kind of okay with
I
that.
look at it differently than you, Malcolm. I look at it absolutely 180 degrees away from maybe those naysayers. And that is that, first of all, that group, as you put it, has always, forever, and always existed. Okay. So
Yeah.
let's just put that out there. But the difference is, in almost every case, including even now, it has existed with arbitrariness involved. In other words, thank goodness the United States and most of the West got away from the truly arbitrary, like the church picked the king and then the king picked the nobles and 100 families and they run everything, feudalism. And then we had, mercantilism, and okay, fine. But there were still class and language barriers and all kinds of little things that put people into categories that had nothing to do with anything meritocratic and really everything to do with all this arbitrary crap. What you've built is you've built something where, if somebody can just get access to the internet, which is now getting ubiquitous. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
even if you're at the lowest rung on the totem pole, you have a smartphone, you have a tablet. Most people in America do, certainly, even the so-called impoverished. And
Yeah.
so could there be anything more equitable or equal access than this? So, yes, your child has to learn to read, but again, learning to read is even now made that much easier because let's say you don't want to go buy or go to the library to get,
Yeah.
teach your kid to read in 100 lessons. It's probably AI could probably do it too. You could probably
Yeah.
ask the AI to teach your kid to read, and it could probably start teaching your kid to read. So there's nothing holding anybody back that is arbitrary other than perhaps a learning disability or something organic. Like there's something organically wrong, and that is unfortunate. But
Yeah.
if your child is of average intelligence and you can get access to the internet, there's no class structure, there's no elitism, there's no government entity that's going to stop you from doing this.
Yeah.
And how is that elitist in a bad way?
So I love it. What I'd end with is, if you want to check this out, collinsinstitute.org, you can just Google Collins Institute. Got a link to it right there, but it's actually at Parasia.io. Like that's the learning platform's URL.
Sure.
And then, but you'd find a link to Collins Institute, and that's probably easier to type. The next thing I would note here is check out us on Basecamp. That's
Yes.
our podcast, YouTube. And then the final thing I'd note here is if you are Pennsylvania in Montco, while I say like society seems to be going in a bad direction, like the school system, we're always trying to fix things where we can. So my wife is running for office right now as a Republican on the ticket. So if you're in PA and Montco, make sure you get out and vote in this next election cycle. Even if you don't like some of the top of the ticket candidates, keep in mind there are going to be people like my wife who really do want to try to make things better if she can.
Well, awesome.